So now to resume this morning's work, we're going to move on to a roundtable, a very interesting roundtable on resilience in the energy field. So it is Jan Bourgeot who will be moderating this roundtable. So I'd like to ask the speakers to come up on stage. Please come along. Let's have a slide showing their photographs. And it's Jan Bourgeot who will be introducing the speakers to you. Jan, over to you. Good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So we have 1 hour for this roundtable. I hope you're ready. You've had coffee. You're raring to go. Not looking at your cell phones, looking at us. We have a great panel here for you this morning. We're going to talk about energy. We're going to talk about electricity networks. We're going to talk about management of energy and cybersecurity of industrial systems. So we're talking about OT systems, industrial control systems as well, which we find in most plants and also on electricity grids, and all the threats to those systems, more and more attacks, which are increasingly sophisticated, and also the opportunities we have with digital transformation in plants, how we address all that with older systems that need to be secured, and then what digital can bring in these OT systems. Now, to talk about this for an hour, we have three stakeholders, two from the energy sector, producer, EDF, who's represented by Olivier Lignol, who is the Cybersecurity Director for the EDF Group, an actor from the supply chain, upstream and downstream, with nuclear and also recycling, which is Orano, represented here by Anthony De Prima, who is the CSIO, and also Schneider Electric, who work with energy through solutions, software, equipment, and represented by Samuel Bror, who is CSIO for France and Benelux. So now, what I was talking about in terms of cybersecurity of these OT systems, which are most of the time aging. So you have older systems, and there is a legacy in these plants with equipment that, well, dates back quite a few years. So we have to address these issues related to security and also upkeep and maintenance of these systems. So how do you address this opening to the digital world that's increasingly present in our plants? Perhaps, Olivier, you'd like to start. Yes, thank you for the introduction. We have systems that are increasingly, well, I was going to say old, but I don't want to say old, but most of them still work very well, especially in the winter. It's very important for them to work well. But we have a production environment at EDF which is getting older, and we need to be resilient. We need to be able to get the system to work at all times and to, well, meet the requirements. And the basic requirement, of course, is to provide energy. And that is clearly our objective with systems that are analog systems. And then we have some digital systems. And alongside that, we have some environments which are starting to be rolled out, deployed in our production systems, which we need technologies, which, of course, modern technologies, and that have capacity to be connected, to interact, and to have a better command of the industrial tool. And so here we are at a crossroads, in fact, between two worlds. We have to keep things in operational condition, in security conditions, and needs related to, well, of course, similar to what is required in IT. We need to ensure security, not necessarily patching, but we need to make sure that if we have vulnerability, they are not accessible for attackers. And then we also have environments where historically we have systems that we need to update and upgrade. And you can't just change a system overnight. It can take decades. Anthony, you might like to add something. Well, perhaps just to follow on from what Olivier was saying, digitization of plants, it goes beyond the plant itself. There's a real issue here to understand where the scope of industrial information systems, virtual boundaries that are moving, and that it's very difficult to identify where it starts and ends. So on the value chain in the energy sector, we rely on different companies that are interconnected. There's an interface in terms of their processes. It's the supply chain, and throughout that value chain, there are information systems. And from the viewpoint of maintaining in operational conditions, in security conditions, if you're looking at a resilience approach, you need to work on the whole value chain. And from the viewpoint of a given industrialist, you have to have a command of all these interfaces and the whole ecosystem. And here there is a challenge of having a fine-tuned approach and really knowing how the interfaces work together, and also knowing who is going to be working on that. From when we're talking about planning of an intervention in a plant or in the energy sector, maybe to change a part. Well, you have a planning phase. There might be a request for production of parts, and then there's the actual intervention, and the whole chain has data flows, interfaces, and it shows that there's a real interdependence between industrial stakeholders. And resilience is global, is overall comprehensive, and if something goes wrong there, the whole chain, in fact, could go wrong. So it's very important to be observed throughout the chain with all the people involved on a daily basis. So just to follow on from what you were saying, Anthony, I got to EDF 9 years ago, and 9 years ago at EDF we were saying, well, there are partitions, you can't have access, and we were cohabiting between all the different environments, and it was very difficult to pass on information between the different departments and sections. And we had very mechanical environments that needed to be physically protected because there were no electronic resources to protect them. So we had access control systems, for example, that we added to these systems and environments. But today, as Anthony has said, we share the same working environment, we share the same processes, and we have a back and forth in all our processes and information systems that is increasingly optimized, and that's totally changed the way we work now. Yes, I think that we can add the human dimension to that in the sense that cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity, is not only for people who work on PLCs or for IT experts. It's a corporate approach. And in that regard, if we don't have everybody on board, everybody in the plants, on industrial sites, we will not be able to address this issue of OT cybersecurity. So we really have to work with them. So perhaps, Samuel, your experience at Schneider? Yes, quite right. If you look at the three fundamental pillars, techno, process, people, I think that the most important pillar is the focus on people. On this event, you're going to be meeting quite a few publishers who have technical solutions, but without the people for the processes and for the technology, well, we can't do very much with it. So most of the vulnerabilities, in fact, are related to human error, whether voluntary or involuntary. So this is really the cornerstone. We need to focus on the human factor first and foremost. At Schneider Electric, our staff are trained. There is mandatory training every year on all cyber topics, but a high-level training concerns the use of information systems in IT, but not so much in OT. We also have specific training regarding the professions in which our different specialists are working. Training intended for the blue-collar workers, so that these specialists have a culture of cyber-related issues in the environment. Schneider Electric is a manufacturing industry. OT for us is not just industrial activities, it's also R&D. And in R&D, we have many industrial systems. Through the profiles that we have a number of vulnerabilities there. Related to research, of course, and finding innovation, because sometimes we need to open some doors to be able to test new offers, and that leads to new vulnerabilities, new risks with new profiles, and of course we have to manage all of that. And as Jan was saying, it is a corporate culture. We have to ensure that all our staff, with all their different professions and lines of work, have that culture, each of them their own speciality. And so today, in the energy sector, we talk about safety a lot. Well, 30, 40 years ago, stakeholders in those sectors would be talking, well, They were not very interested in securing infrastructure because there was a paradigm between availability and security. But now, 30 years down the line, you see that these systems have evolved. We've integrated that safety component. At Schneider Electric, we've done the same thing, more or less. But in the manufacturing approach, we use resources that come from, well, to allow upgrading, upscaling to work on cyber. Schneider has over 200 industrial sites throughout the world. So we have a cybersecurity site leader whose role is to manage the risks, to manage the performance and health and sound IT systems applied to OT to ensure that all the people involved have the skills they need to work in those on the production chains, for example. So all of this is connected to the SOC that manages the Security Operations Center, manages all of these operations. So in 23-24, these people who were methods managers before, now they participate in crisis meetings. For example, when we have an incident that concerns their scope on the OT activity. So there was a gap there, and it takes time to, you can't just change overnight. There are people who are not very well versed in cyber issues in their initial environment. So we have to ensure that they do get training. I was listening to Frédéric Blanc from Rexel a few minutes ago, and at that time, in fact, I met him 7 or 8 years ago, and I was actually I was a show moderator on a training course, and he was one of the trainees. But now he's, very well versed and clued up on that today, as you could see this morning. But talking about safety, functional security, I know it's early, but we were talking to so for the different levels, A61513, for example. So, but Anthony can talk to you as well about nuclear sites. There are various measures that deal with cybersecurity in cybersecurity 6396 in these different texts that address these issues. There are connections to 2701, 2702. So there's a connection between those and the safety context in nuclear with a high-level requirement that we have in IT. And just to follow on from in the nuclear safety and security, and you were talking about the staff aspect, the human factor here is extremely important. So if everybody isn't on board, if everybody doesn't adopt this, cybersecurity is something that needs to be addressed at a corporate-wide level. And you have to, how do you work with this in Orano, with people who work on nuclear safety and now the cybersecurity component, how does that fit in? Well, in some environments, we're talking at EDF, of course, we talk about it in a different way compared to what we talk about at Orano. But the risk, the cyber risk, of course, there are regulations that address that. A facility manager or plant manager will be confronted with that, of course. But in energy, throughout the supply chain, we have industrialists who have more manufacturing-related issues. So a plant or a facility manager who will look at and sponsor, as it were, an OT strategy will have to look at all of this. Today, of course, it's an absolute essential. If you just watch the news, you can see ransomware attacks on hospitals. You can look at denial of service attacks. So cyber monitoring is absolutely essential. And what I mean there is that this is a good opportunity to learn about all of this, to enhance the culture of all the directors, all the managers. So it's not just the people working in the plants themselves, but it's also the top management of the plant. And beyond cyber is also the issue of resilience. You can talk about cyber, you can talk about technical aspects, but the important thing for them, of course, is to be resilient when faced with cyber attacks and to be able to ensure the safety of the facility. And so the idea is to have a strategy, an OT strategy, which is based on products that you can find here, but also, of course, on people, as Samuel said. To do that, we need a collective approach. We talked a lot about IT-OT convergence from a technological viewpoint. I believe that today it depends on the organizations, their level of maturity, the convergence of people in industry. So we're not quite there yet. We often see issues related to scope. We say that we have to have a collaborative approach, IT, OT, but it's not so much a collaborative approach, it's a collective approach. And to be efficient, to be effective, we have to work forward. We go from, we can go from PLC to cloud. So we have to rethink our strategy, rethink our organizations. This is a message that I would like to convey. I think that we have to evolve. We have to be able to produce IT and provide IT services and cybersecurity services to multidisciplinary teams from OT, from IT, to work together collectively on the cybersecurity issues. So the people challenge is definitely there, depending on the maturity of the organizations, including in the energy sector. Of course, all companies don't have the same level of maturity, do not have the same level of service, don't have the same challenges. So we have to have this collective approach and think about this together. And as was said by Samuel, we need training. We need to create training courses to allow people to learn about these issues, to people to be able to gain new skills on IT skills on. These people, in fact, de facto had to learn all of these new things, gain these new skills, acquire these new skills, but they are working on, they have skills, but sometimes these skills are diluted between the industrial teams, the information systems teams. And so we have to have the right approach that is going to fit in with the culture of the company, so that at the end of the day, we can meet the resilience challenges. Thank you to you both. I'd like to come back to the threat. You were talking about just, if you just watch the news, basically any day of the week, you have increasingly sophisticated, evolved threats. Industrial systems that are increasingly targeted, and news on the international front, which is of course extremely induces a great deal of anxiety for us, for our electricity grid, for our systems. So Olivier, I'm sure that EDF has a lot to do in that regard. How do you deal with this collectively? How are you organized when you are the head of cybersecurity for the group and you have the current system? All right, well, at the level of the threat, the first thing that we need to take into consideration is the fact that in a number of industrial activities, we're talking about energy and resilience here, but this is also, of course, valid in many other industrial activities, which I'm sure you all represent in this room. There is a need to take into account the purpose, the object of our mission. So when you produce or transport energy, the object of your mission is to be able to do, of course, what you have to do, but also to be able to provide something that is vital or essential for other stakeholders who also have a critical business. So Guillaume was talking earlier about critical operators. It's not because the ranking is high, it's because their responsibility is broader. And we were talking about maturity, and I like the way Anthony presented things. You don't have to be an expert in all the standards, in industrial standards, to be able to steer operations, but of course, it's important to know about those standards. I'm not saying it isn't, but what I mean is that it's important to know what we need to do and who can threaten, who can jeopardize what we need to do. So we need to look before, when I worked in different environments or more traditional IT environments, we need to look at who the potential groups of attackers are, who wants to jeopardize our environment or our industrial processes. So at the level of our business, of our activities, there was quite a lot, of course, involving the conflict in Ukraine. We saw that there was a direct impact in our capacity to produce electricity. And it's interesting to know, on the one hand, how this is done, and on the other hand, how it could actually extend and come much closer to us. And the second aspect, once you know who the attackers are and what their motives are and who's supporting them, is to know how they're going to be doing it. So what technical resources are they going to be using? What tools? We're talking about technological convergence, and I fully agree with what you said. So So we have equipment that is communicating equipment, and that can give much more information. It's going to be much more interesting and worthwhile. But it allows us to have a security operations center, incident response, to professionalize our teams. We really have to know the standards. I'm coming back to the standards. We know the equipment, the plant, how it works, how those could be damaged or jeopardized. We talked about, man-in-the-middle attacks we were talking about earlier. And then there's something else that we have to do. And Jan said something about that when he talked about the ISO 27000. We're talking about maybe to rank the level of threat. So what are the applicable benchmarks, references? So there's an industrial environment where we know the state it's in with respect to the reference. But, you're talking about patching, but has everybody really mapped what they have, their equipment, and to see the level of risk that you're exposed to in terms of your industrial facilities? It's not easy to do that mapping. And the second aspect is how you professionalize the services around that. What we've decided to do in the EDF group is two things. On the one hand, at the level of our Security Operations Center, we had some issues related to our size, to our complexity, and our traditional SOC activity for the whole group, including the subsidiaries, so huge volume. And alongside that, we also created P10 SOC, which was also works with other players, other parties who are also providing SOC services to provide protection for these monitoring activities and to make sure that we have an acceptable level of protection with regard to potential threats. So the P10 is really useful to us to protect the industrial environment. Thank you, Olivier. Now, to follow on from that, regarding logistics, at the level of Schneider, you were talking about the plants. What about the distribution centers? Because they're also OT systems. Yes, absolutely. Just to follow on from what Olivier was saying, you need to have visibility. You need the people. You need to make available to those people visibility. And in the past, systems were independent, so the IT department didn't have much visibility on the OT part. But now, because of the interconnections, it brings in new risks, of course, but it also gives us an opportunity through this connectivity to gain increased visibility and to have the right assessment of the risk level with respect to outside profiles of cybercrime groups who could attempt to enter your information systems. So our vision, our plants, so we have security on our plants, we have a detection reaction environment which is in place. Now we realize that there are many third parties who actually work on our systems, and we are also third parties for some of our colleagues. So when staff members go to update a firmware in an interconnection hub, HTB for example, but perhaps for mechanical maintenance on a high voltage facility. So it's just to. What I'm saying is that we need to manage the risk related to suppliers, related to third parties who are all involved in that ecosystem, in our industrial systems, whether they're purely industrial systems or energy systems. So it's just the same idea, really. So MasterCard, for example, they've said that over 50% of incidents involve a third party. So it's just to tell you the importance of managing the risk related to third parties. The general ambition at Schneider Electric regarding management of suppliers is, like for an industrial information system, is of course to have good knowledge, to map it, to have the most complete mapping we can possibly have. I'll let my colleagues talk about this, but we have over 200 sites, plants in the world, as I said. The first job we have to do is with purchasing, to make sure that really at the very beginning, upstream, we have a complete mapping of all the third parties who will be working on our sites. And that's not easy to do, I can tell you, to be able to have this contractual aspect, to have a contractual monitoring throughout the sites, throughout the world, anywhere a third party will be working on one of your sites, and then be able to assess that on a cyber scoring process, qualify the level of risk that the third party represents. It's mechanical maintenance on a high voltage cell, or a third party doing an update on a digital protection relay. Well, it won't have the same impact if you have a malware, in there somewhere. On the first case, it's mechanical maintenance, so it's unlikely. But on the second case, it's digital and electrical maintenance on a relay. And in that case, it could be critical. So really assess the level of risk that the third party represents, and then adapt the process, the risk management process related to that third party. And through that, the idea is to have cyber assessment and to continue to monitor the level of maturity and to make the necessary arrangements and changes depending on how the entity evolves. Beyond that, it's also to create trust. We work on that a lot at Schneider Electric, that trust relationship with the ecosystem, with our clients, with the authorities, the interaction through the third parties, with everything that we are going to be delivering in terms of manufacturing to our clients. When you have a project that consists of delivering a command control system that is going to be integrated into an interconnection system, very often we have relays that we assemble, and then we assemble them in a subsystem or a full system that needs to be tested on site before it can be put into production mode on the client site. That whole phase, secure by manufacturing, secure by commissioning. So all of this is the value chain as a whole. So not just the system itself, but everything upstream and downstream from the system itself. But we'll talk about that later. But all of that you also have to manage in terms of risk to ensure that the relay that arrives is properly set up. There's no problem that the integrity of the setup file that will ensure the integrity of the system, that related to the whole electricity system is compliant and complies with what was initially validated. So all of that involves a risk management approach, and that's what we're doing at Schneider. And it's a process that's still ongoing now, is to secure the whole process, the whole manufacturing process, staging, commissioning, by certifying it basing it on referentials, benchmarks, reference systems. It's a good guide, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. And we find a number of criteria, requirements. So you have to choose in there what's really important for your context to be able to challenge our entities when there is something on a control command system, so that we have the right level of security to create trust and to among our clients and our suppliers. Now, to take it a step further, at Schneider Electric, we have approximately 30,000 staff members. I think about 160,000 in the group, but we have 30,000 people who are actually working on our clients' sites. So that's a lot of people, as you can imagine. And so we've decided, beyond the site certifications for staging and commissioning, to secure the entire value chain. We have decided to focus on those profiles by certifying them. We call it the Cyber Badge at Schneider Electric, to secure the tools that are going to be used when they work on the client sites, just updating firmware, the machine that is for an isolated system sometimes, but it's not really an isolated system because of a machine or a memory stick, USB. So the tool that's going to be used to do that, is that tool secure? So it's important to work on the tools, on the technology, but also on the people to adapt their training, to allow them to acquire new skills where they're on the site, so that they have the right reflexes depending on the context that they're working in, on energy, building, or in other areas. And that's also a very important challenge when you have 30,000 people who potentially are concerned by this topic.
Merci.
Thank you so much. Now, let's talk about the cloud. So the link between our opening presentation and now this threats and opportunities of the cloud. But, well, what does it mean for industrial control systems? How do you see that at Orano, for example? Well, currently in the energy sector, when we talk about the cloud, now I don't want to be the spokesperson for the entire industry, but last year in 2023 at INCYBER, we talked about this. Well, we can just run a replay then, can't we? But in any case, we talked about this very sensitive topic. But, when you talk about the legal aspects, that's one thing, and there's questions around hosting. But in the energy sector, we have to be careful about independence, of course. I won't go down that road today. There is a lot of controversy and and I think each company has to have its own posture and doctrine on the issue. At Orano, we are both an upstream and a downstream player in the energy industry. And there are some new activities arising as well. For example, what about electrical batteries, electric vehicle batteries? This is a new field of application. So we're not worried about nuclear security in that instance. But, there are questions around, do we need the cloud or not? And so each company will have to make the decision for itself beyond the legal questions. So my feeling is that we have to look at all of the different use cases and decide if it makes sense. Because if you do go to the cloud, there are risks associated with that. For some industries, it's absolutely necessary, as we just heard from the two previous speakers, because, well, a plant might need resources on the cloud to take advantage of new innovations, Industry 4.0, for example. So the idea isn't just to go to the cloud, but to have the best control possible and deciding to what extent you actually need it and what are the trade-offs. So once you made that decision, the idea is then to build the entire value chain, but from the plant to the cloud, and do it in the most secure manner possible. So when we talk about data collection, where you're going to need to be analyzing data, making decisions, well, all of that requires technological decisions. And depending on the maturity of the company, where do you position yourself? You've got your plants, equipment, the network, and what are you going to build or buy, subcontract to a third party? So and some of these tools can help with predictive maintenance, for example. So there are a lot of choices to be made, and you're going to need the legal department in this as well. So the idea is to do this in the most secure manner possible and try to standardize what can be standardized. What we're seeing today is, people are looking for innovations. They want to test some new things, trying out IoT with some ad hoc systems, and looking for some SaaS solutions, SaaS solutions. But you have to look at your architecture to ensure that you can control it from end to end. Where is the data going to be stored, etc. So this is why the value chain needs standardization to control it, so that you can make the most of your use of the cloud. Well, as you've said, there's a lot of education needed here. We talked about use cases. Look at those before developing your own particular needs. The energy sector has a lot to learn as well. definitely, because when we talk about the cloud, okay, there's two different things going on here when we talk about, electricity 4.0. When we talk about electrical distribution, of course, there's sensors and equipment protecting people and equipment. All of those systems do not now or in the near future need to be involved with the cloud. There's some real-time needs in electrical systems, of course, where we still have a lot of wired systems for triggering transformers. We've got optical fibers with specific protocols, MMS, GUS, for example. Now, for the MMS, we could have, applications for control that could be hosted on the cloud. But for the remote control for protection systems, we're talking about 2 to 4 milliseconds when you're talking about triggering a shutdown switch, for example. Okay. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Why do I say that? Well, because we have to distinguish those critical systems from those that are about better managing energy, which is, of course, very important. And the Paris Treaty, of course, addresses these questions. So to manage electricity, you have to manage the data concerning all of the electrical equipment, looking at the power ratings, temperature. So, for example, in a proactive way, identifying hot spots, perhaps because there is some physical fault on the line. It could be on the bus bar, either way. Then what about, so there's this mass collection of data that can be used on machine learning to help protect people and plant. But we do need isolation of the system. There has to be a decorrelation so that we don't create problems. We don't want there to be a knock-on impacts. So that is essential. We need the visibility, definitely, on who is doing what along the system, so we can have command control systems that are assigned to protection. And then there's another system that is more about data collection. And part of this can be pushed to the cloud for analysis, and that will help improve efficiency and performance. Okay, and these are economical, environmental concerns to help pay less for the electricity, to help consume less, etc. So it's true that, we have some very connected, low voltage systems, transformers that are connected. Why? To be uploading information that is interesting to improve the management of the systems. So coming back to something that Anthony said, when we talk about standards, well, our researchers like to test innovative systems. So if we don't start from a standard for the testing of these new ideas, well, then that's a problem. Because, you can just, unscrew a ventilation vent, but in fact, it can impact an entire system. So you have to be working from a standard to protect the system. And yes, some things can go via the cloud in terms of the management. But it all comes back to people. We have to have the right tools to be testing, collecting, and managing before we can offer a new solution to our clients for their energy management. So there's two approaches to the cloud. There's the protection side, people and plant. But when we talk about energy management, there's a real challenge here. The security by design has to be integrated. So we have to be thinking, so do we go all cloud, hybrid system, what? Olivier, over to you. Would you like to add anything? So bonus question. So yes, I could see you thinking about the question. Well, yes, we do need to be people-centric in our industry. You can tell from my age that my approach is coming from the plant side, but at the same time, the leaders in the field are moving up, moving forward. Okay, and I'm not just talking about the energy sector, but we are seeing some stabilization around the challenges of cybersecurity. There's a maturity that is coming. So yes, some head in the cloud, feet on the ground. Okay, perhaps a final question to the three of you, and perhaps before we take questions from the audience, we talk about critical infrastructure. If we, okay, so there has to be some teamwork, no? Is there any collaboration? What are the partnerships, public-private partnerships, for example? Where do you have to look for collaboration rather than going things alone? So, Anthony? Yes, well, the GFIN is a grouping of industrialists in the nuclear industry. So, and there are federations of end clients as well in specific industries or around specific activities. And when there are digital commissions as well on questions of cybersecurity. So these are interesting bodies, and there can be big players like EDF and smaller players and even service suppliers who participate in these types of committees. And then what we will see from there is either, position papers or case studies, sharing good practices. The idea is to have a number of stakeholders come together. So the GFIN, for example, is a strong representative in the nuclear industry on these subjects. The idea is also to propose off-the-shelf deliverables. So, for example, awareness kits, awareness-raising kits, pedagogical tools, learning modules. So the idea is to raise the skill set of the entire ecosystem. So, there's but also organizing crisis simulations as well, because some of the smaller players, probably can't do this on their own. The ideal is to really raise the skill level all along the chain. So the GFIN is not the only energy sector or body that does this, and other sectors as well. So it's important, for electricity or other power. If you look at the automotive, so there's information sharing centers, the ISACs, for example, information sharing and analysis centers. You see it in pharmaceuticals as well. So other industries beyond energy, where there can be some also cross-cutting. Intercept, for example, some cross-cutting instances as well. Well, the GFIN, I think if you look a few years back, before a stronger structuring of the nuclear industry, it became increasingly necessary, and this was pushed by the government as well. And so that is what allowed the GFEN to be put in place. In fact, so keep that in mind, and there is a lot of cybersecurity there, data management. Now, in the ISAC for the energy sector, these can be really global interests. So it's hard to find, a common consensus there, a common framework, for some zones, Western Europe, Asia, you might find some commonalities. But on the European side, there's also EXO, and Schneider has always been very active in those networks. But how at the European level do we get our CISOs to talk to each other, for example? It takes time. It takes a lot of energy. But what about distributors? We can see associations of power distribution companies as well who are starting to talk to each other about cybersecurity, and at national level in the energy sector. Well, there are associations of CISOs, of course, and others, and events, well, like this event today, focused on industry, and some state-led initiatives. So Cyber Campus, for example, in France, and I'm on the board, for example, for Sanofi on these. And so you can have certain industries, verticals, or cross-cutting organizations to organize cooperation. And the government, the NSE, New Energy Systems for France, is an interministerial body. All of that put together means that there can be a lot of interaction. Now, but then it will all depend on affinities as well, or in certain areas you might be more interested than others. But there's a whole ecosystem out there. Alongside that, when we look at the big energy players and tier world affairs, of course, can also influence those that common work. So when we look at state-sponsored attacks on systems, these are of great concern. But there is solidarity as well amongst certain actors, particularly those subject to attack. And, we can really look around what's going on. It's in the interest of the global community to inform each other of potential attacks. And if we see that someone along the supply chain has been attacked, well, then you need to take the lead to inform others who might use that particular supplier. So there has to be a lot of shared help as well. Okay, well, thank you so much. Any concluding words, and then we'll see if we have time for questions from the audience. Well, I just really want to insist on the need for collective action. So collaborate when possible, break down historic barriers. That's a challenge, and really opening up across the industry. And looking for the right partners in cybersecurity. Well, coming back to two topics. So there's the logistics chain for overall security, but there's the NIS2 directive as well, where there's now 10,000 businesses operators that will be involved, so this involves a lot of third parties. I think it's very important to have them on board with these regulations as well. And then in the future, we really need to be concerned about the scarcity of the skilled professionals. We're lacking those skills, and that has to be on the IT, OT skills as well. So we talk about having them coordinate, but we need some skilled professionals who can handle both at the same time. So there's a real scarcity there. So that's going to be a huge challenge for future resilience. So yes, teamwork is important. It's getting more and more complicated because, there are some players that are being excluded from the systems due to their behavior. So the threat is there. At the same time, we mustn't be passive about this. We have to be very proactive. It's up to us to speak to lawmakers, to speak to the government about what are the needs in terms of regulation. That's up to us. So we have to, be pedagogical about that, to get the governments to understand what the needs are so that we can better protect our industries. Okay, so cybersecurity, you can see it's a bit of a marathon, coming back to my sports analogy. And so thank you very much to our three guest speakers. We do have 5 minutes for questions. In fact, any questions from the audience? So only 2 questions is about all we have time for. Thank you so much. Guillaume Crino, Multifactor. Thank you. Very interesting talk. I'm very sensitive to what you've said about the cooperation between IT and OT. So I'd like your view. Somebody mentioned the man-in-the-middle attacks. A very concrete example, PKI in plants is not yet there. The equipment is there, but when we open up the documentation, there's recommendations. There's the certificates. What we are seeing, in fact, is that there's we don't have a real permeability between IT and OT. When do you see this coming to Europe in particular? Oh, well, I don't have a crystal ball. So it's going to depend from one business to the next. Some are integrating the PKIs. We talk about Industry 4.0. So there are different web protocols, for example, based on certificates to secure, the PKI is often involved there. So it's a question of finding the right balance, having the right skills in the right place and the right systems. But we do need to break down barriers between the people as well, because sometimes the obstacles to implementation is organizational, even generational. Perhaps in the near future, we're going to see people arriving, digital natives who have always known cyber security. So perhaps they will be more agile. And I'm not, criticizing the earlier generations, who are the great experts in SCADAs and PLCs. So but then each business is going to have to make progress at their own pace. And I do think we're headed in the right direction. So we're going to have to wrap up the session. So I do encourage you, if there are more questions, you can please seek them out. They'll be here. Yes, that was a big question. It was only one question, but it was a big question. Okay, thank you again, everyone.